minutes past, so let's figure that people have made their way on and have, let's begin. We have Jesse, who's the Rabbi today, and I want to thank Jesse very much for doing that. And I'll get my turn to talk in a minute, but Janet's going to start.
Okay. On behalf of the Adult Education Committee of Temple Emanu-El, it is my pleasure to welcome you all today. And I am honored to introduce Rabbi Dr. Susan Marks. As many of you know, Rabbi Marks is an associate professor and the Klingenstein Chair of Judaic Studies at the New College of Florida. She has a master's degree in Hebrew letters from the Hebrew Union College in Los Angeles. She has rabbinic ordination from the Hebrew Union College in New York. And she has a PhD in religious studies from the University of Pennsylvania. Rabbi Marks has received numerous grants, honors, and fellowships, too numerous for me to even mention, and also has presented at, again, numerous conferences and seminars on Jewish studies, biblical literature, women's studies, and much more. She has published extensively on these topics, again, and more. Her resume is incredibly extensive, so this is very, very brief, but I am so impressed, and I know we will be thrilled today with her presentation. It's my honor to introduce Rabbi Dr. Susan Marks.
Thank you for that beautiful introduction. I very much appreciate it. I must have sent you a sort of out-of-date CV though, because I'm actually professor, have been for several years. So,
there we go.
You know, you have to
keep up with you.
Exactly, but I enjoyed being associate professor too. Anyway, it's just such a treat to see everybody. Thank you all for being here. As so many of you know, this was originally supposed to happen last year in March, right? We had other things we were doing by the second half of March, but here we are, and it's my pleasure. I know a lot more about Zoom. I didn't know much about Zoom at all then, right? I knew it existed. That was about the extent of it. But the chance to talk about women in the rabbinic period is just absolutely a delightful thing for me, because I love studying rabbinic literature, but the fact of the matter is they're not particularly interested in women. And they may talk about women that have to do with them for various reasons, but it's a pretty male-driven set of docs for the most part. And yet, those of us who are women, those of us who love women, have a lot of questions about how women were part of that movement, what was their role, what did they do? And one of the things that I just love about teaching and learning is to emphasize the power of a question. If you don't ask, you don't see. So that a question opens up a world. And the question of what were women doing, as I say, it wasn't asked by the authors of the Talmud for the most part, nor was it asked by most of the readers for centuries. But it's one of the great gifts of the feminist movement, is to offer us new questions and new ways of looking at things we had seen before. So I want to share here, I'm going to share my screen in just a minute, but I want to put in the chat for everybody in the meeting. This is a URL that will take you to a Google Doc that I'll be putting it on the screen and reading it. So you don't have to click on it, but if you want to click on it, you will have the texts for yourself on your screen, even when we go back to doing all this face-to-face stuff. I like the face-to-face. I like to be able to see people and to talk with you. So I'll be going back and forth between the screen, and having the Google Doc will, oh, and it looks like Jesse posted. It looks like Jesse just muted all of us so that we can don't have noise in the background. But I do hope that if you have something to say, you will feel free to unmute yourself and say it. Jesse's here as Rabbi to help, and I'm so appreciative of that, because when you have this many people on the screen, it's a little bit hard to know for sure whether you're seeing everybody. So there's two of us, but also if you feel like your hand's been up a while and nobody's seen you, just unmute yourself and talk, because we do want to hear from everybody. So that's the plan. I'm going to share and then go back and forth. But so you have the text, I'll be sharing the text, but go back to the idea of a question. The first document that I'm going to share is really a text that, or it's an inscription, and it was found at the end of the 1800s, but it wasn't until Bernadette Bruton was working on these inscriptions from Asia Minor, that's Turkey, in that, and this is a text from the 2nd century of the Common Era, I think, though there may be a little bit of rethinking about the date. But in any case, around the 2nd century of the Common Era, and what's so fascinating is that it mentions, and here I'm going to share the text, just a second, have it there and then share it. Okay, so this is what the first text that you'll see on your, on the Google Doc. All right. Okay, so here we have an inscription that, and I should have asked somebody to read it. Would somebody like to read? Anybody want to unmute themselves and just offer? And
I'll read.
Perfect. Go for it.
All right. Rufina, a Jewish or Judean woman, head of the synagogue, built this tomb for her freed slaves and the slaves raised in her house. No one else has the right to bury anyone here. Anyone who dares to do so will pay 1,500 denarii to the sacred treasury and 1,000 denarii to the Jewish people or the Judean ethnos. A copy of this inscription has been placed in the public archives.
All right, so here, this juicy inscription, which talks about a woman as the head of a synagogue, the president of a synagogue, arche synagogos is what it says in Greek, was understood when it was dug up by archaeologists at the end of the 1800s as referring most likely to the wife of the president of the synagogue. So that was the lens which they had for reading it. They didn't know about women who could be head of their synagogue. So this was the only reading. But when you look at the language of this text, why is that kind of a iffy reading? What else do you know about Rufina here? And I should also, go for it.
That she had slaves.
She had slaves, right.
She owned slaves and she was caring for them.
She was a woman of means. She had a great deal of money to build, and I should have said this is a beautiful piece of marble that's been inscribed. So she had slaves, she cared for them. So she's making sure that the household that she has an allegiance to, she's looking after. So she had slaves, she freed them, she freed some of them. So there's a lot we don't know, obviously, but even with this short inscription, we see that she is a wealthy woman. What else is mentioned or not mentioned here that is relevant to this question?
She's assertive.
She's assertive, right? She has agency. She doesn't, it's not that we're hearing about her from somebody else. She is speaking in her voice on this stone. What else?
There is no husband mentioned.
There is no husband mentioned, right?
Right.
Exactly, and so it's coming from a couple directions, but that's exactly it. So it took 100 years and the feminist movement for someone to say, there's no husband mentioned on this text. So the easy, simple shot reading of this text is not that she's the wife of the president, but that she actually is a woman of means who is able to do this. Now, again, huge questions because we just have a little information, but one of the things that this is in keeping with is a sense of there being evidence at contemporaneous evidence within Christianity and within the Roman and Hellenistic world of women who were leaders, who were responsible for financial donations, you know, for as high priestesses and other kinds of things within the Roman community, who made donations, who Jerome writes letters to to a whole handful of women who are supporting his scholarly endeavors and others. So we know of Christian benefactors, we know of Hellenistic and Roman benefactors. So here is a benefactor who is a Jewish woman. Now, she's not a rabbinic. We don't have any reason to associate this community in Izmir with, this is where she is, with a rabbinic community at this point in time. So what do we know about the rabbinic community? And this is where I want to go back and share this next text. I think I'll read because it's a little crunchy in terms of names and stuff. But there'll be more to read later. And in this text, what I'm doing is I'm taking a sidestep. This doesn't talk about a woman who's a benefactor, but it does talk about a businesswoman. This, I've tried to give you on this sheet the references so that you can follow some of this scholarship yourself if you're so inclined. Before I turn the page, though, I want to, at the top of the page, show you this inscription. The inscription I'm going to show you at the top of the page is a stone inscription from a synagogue, a rabbinic synagogue, it seems like, or a rabbinic Beit Midrash. It's actually a Beit Midrash inscription, excuse me, that was found in the Golan. And so let me share that, and then I'll segue into Rufina again. I mean, not Rufina, but this inscription, isn't this a glorious inscription? And you can see here this word hakapal or hakapar. That's a scratch there, so that's really a resh, even though it looks like a lamed. Anyway, so this is Eliezer hakoper. This is Eliezer hakafar, and this is for the Beit Midrash of Rabbi Eliezer hakafar. It's probably a 5th century, so there's some debate. Is it, you know, some people wanted to see it as an earlier stone, and it's really the Rabbi Ezer named in the Talmud. Most people aren't willing to date the stone that earlier, so they're more inclined to think that it was people who built a synagogue in his name. There's no donor mentioned, but it's not that we don't have some evidence of named things and donors and whatnot. So anyway, I just have been studying Beit Midrashim lately, or Batei Midrash is the right way to say it, Batei Midrash, and I just, you know, this is the one inscription that lets us know of a physical Beit Midrash, and I couldn't resist including it, even though it's a little off topic. But so the step sideways is to give this evidence of someone involved in business. And as I say, this is from Shulamit Waller's piece. And this is an online piece, by the way. So please feel free to read more of what she's saying, because she's got a whole article on business women, and I've just pulled this one piece as an example. But it's a fascinating example. A certain woman owned a palm tree on ground belonging to Rabbi Bibi ben Abaya. And this is from the Babylonian Talmud, by the way. And whenever she went to cut it, so harvest time, Rabbi Bibi would show resentment. So she made it over to him for life. He thereupon went and made it over to his son. Enter Rabbi Huna, the son of Rabbi Joshua, who said, "Because you are yourselves frail, you speak frail words." Even Rabbi Shimon ben Gamliel gave his decision only in the case where the original owner had assigned the state to another person, but not when it is to return to the owner himself. All right, so here we have this wonderfully elliptic piece of Talmud, which it's wonderfully elliptic because it's Talmud. That's kind of the way Talmud texts do. So it's very condensed. We do have a sense of her having property. And this one tree is in her neighbor's yard, or she has to cross his property to get to it, right? We all know of properties that are not always adjacent and other things. So she sells it. Here's a question. She doesn't sell it, actually. She gives it to him for his life. Why? The text doesn't tell us, so we're sort of free to imagine. Any guesses?
He was harassing her?
He was harassing her, so it made her life easier. So that's one possibility. Go for it, Betty.
Maybe it was his, she put the responsibility on him to take care of the palm tree also.
Yes, right. Okay. That's her property. She wants it held well, but he's going to harvest it well because he's there. What else? So let me share you Shulamit Waller's words here. However, why did she do it? Was she weary of the repeated confrontations? Did she do it for his sake to avoid answering him? Was she tired of the hard work and responsibility? Or, and here's one more chance, one possibility, did she simply seize a chance for a good deal that would bring worthwhile compensations for temporary transfer of rights? Worthwhile perhaps because the price was high or because his life did not appear long. So in other words, we're not given all the information. So what she says is, since the assumption she seized upon the opportunity for a good deal is no less plausible than the others, we may be looking at a woman who is not only independent, self-respecting, hard work, and skillful at farm work, but is a seasoned businesswoman. So, does it make sense to do this deal? He wants it, he's hassling her, let's do it. But then he tries to be tricky and say, now that it's mine, I'm going to hand it on with the rest of my property. And even within the rabbinic community, he was given a set down. That's a little chutzpahdik if you're given something for your lifetime to assume that it's yours forever. So, here we have a little taste of a business transaction that interests the Talmud because of the business transaction. And we see in the little margins this woman there. So we do know of, she doesn't have a name, but we do know of Talmudic women who are ready to do business deals, who have property. So again, thinking about, how much money does it take to run a place like Emanu-El? You want to have people who have substance participate. So why is it that we don't see more discussion of women giving to support their Jewish institutions? It's a little bit puzzling if you think about it in that perspective. So we'll leave that puzzle for a moment. The next text I want to share, and again, it's got some names, so I think I'm going to take us through it. But this is, again, material evidence. And one of the things, as a scholar who by definition is skeptical, is I love Talmud, but it's a literary source. So they can say whatever they want. And I want to have other ways of knowing about the time period, other ways of figuring out how to read what's going on in the Talmud other than with my 21st century eyes or through a medieval lens like Rashi or Rambam. I want to know what I can about the world they lived in so that I can pursue my questions in that historical context. So there's this wonderful trove of letters that goes by the name Babata archive. And though this is found by Yadin, anyway, it's a piece of papyri, and you get a real sense of business transactions, as Babata was her son's guardian. I'm not sure if it was her son or her stepson, but in any case, she does not trust the guardians, and she keeps ending up in court. And that's good for us because we have these records. And so here is, if I have any lawyers here, you're probably more used to reading things like that than I am, because it's this real, here we are in Petra, I think, yeah, or his, so we've got a court context. In the 9th year of Imperator Trianus Hadrianus Caesar Augustus, in the consulship of Marcus Valerius Asiaticus for the 2nd time, and Titus Aquilanus 4 days before the Ides of October, and according to the compute of the province of Arabia, year 20th in the 24th month of Hyperbratios, called Thracia in Maoza, Zahora district. So we've located ourselves in time and space. Before, now we got the witnesses, attending witnesses, Babata, daughter of Simon, son of Menachem, through her guardian for this matter, and so she has to have a guardian for this matter because she's a woman, Judah, son of, I don't even know how to say his name, summoned John, son of Joseph Eglos, one of the guardians appointed by the Council of Petra for her son, Jesus, and the orphan of Jesus, saying, on account of your not having given to my son the said orphan, just as so-and-so your colleague has given receipt, therefore I summon you to attend to the court. And so you get the idea. And so we have signatures and so forth. So what this does for us is it sort of, in some ways, confirms the reality of what we just saw in the Talmud text, right? We saw a businesswoman who was transacting business, and lest we sort of discount that possibility, how could women do that? I don't think anybody here is inclined to do that, but you do know of readers prior to this moment who might have read that a little bit more skeptically, and and in fact seen the rabbi as entitled to the tree because she was stupid enough to give it to him. That would be an alternate reading. But if you see Babata, who is running off to Petra every time she gets a chance because she's just not happy with the way the guardians are looking after the property of this minor, you realize that no, our knowledge of women who are very miduyeket, very exacting about their rights and their financial rights, we see that it's a little bit earlier than Talmud, it's 2nd century, but we nevertheless see this window so that we know we're not making things up to imagine that. So, all right, any questions so far? You've been traveling through lots of centuries. So all right, well, seeing none, then we'll keep going. What I want to do next, and this is sort of
I have a question.
Please go for it.
Okay, in that phrase that you just read, I thought you were saying that even though she went to court, she had to have like a representative to represent her at the same time that her son had a guardian.
Yeah, that's what it seems like. And that's why, and again, I haven't read a lot. There's a whole bunch of documents. And so you get to know more about Babata. And it says her son, but it may not be her. I think it's her stepson. And so that there's some tension between, one of the things in the litigation. So it's a good question. Does every woman appearing at Petra have to have a guardian? And that I don't know. Okay. But that's a good question. And I wish I had an answer, but I don't. So I'll keep my ears peeled. If I hear anything, I'll let you know. But any other questions? All right. So anyway, with that context, I want to share some texts that have been near and dear to my heart. And these concern Rabbi Akiba's wife. And every once in a while, there's a name that appears to her, but I think it's kind of a late text, so I don't think I even have that one. So she's mostly just called wife of Akiba. But she was very supportive of her husband's education. And the question is, what does that mean? What does it mean that she was very supportive? And I ultimately am going to argue that she was a major donor, as we would define it, and therefore in keeping with the kind of donors we do see in Christian texts and in Roman and Hellenistic literature of the period. But it just to see it and what's there and what's not quite so visible, I think is certainly worth our time to look at these texts and think about them. So I could have 3 readers read the Babylonian Talmud text about Rabbi Akiba, if anybody's wanting to let me know if they're interested.
I'll start.
Who's that?
Roberta, I'll start, yeah.
Okay, Roberta will read the first one. Who would like to read the second one? Betty, go for it. And who else? One more reader?
Ruth.
Okay,
Ruth?
So Roberta and Betty and Ruth. And okay, so I'm going to share my screen again. And so here we are in Talmud and contributions to higher education by Akiba's wife. This is what we're looking at here. And
Okay.
notice I sort of talked about Talmudic ambivalence, because I think that the text is not as clear as it might be. So Roberta, please.
Okay. Rabbi Akiba was the shepherd of Ben Kalba Sabua. His daughter saw in him that he was modest and outstanding. She said to him, "If I become betrothed to you, will you go to the academy?" He said to her, "Yes." She became betrothed to him in secret, and she sent him away. Her father heard and banished her from his house, and forbade her with a vow from deriving any benefit from his property.
Okay, so that's here in Babylonian Talmud Ketubah, and we get one little slice of this combination story of her life legend. It's kind of a little bit not clear, so I want to sort of keep both those terms in our mind. All right, I think Betty, you were the next reader.
Okay. The daughter of Talba Sabua became engaged to Rabbi Akiba. Talba Sabua heard and cut her off from any of his property. She went and married him in the winter. They used to lie in the hay barn, and he would take hay out of the hair. He said to her, "Were I only able, I would give you a Jerusalem of gold." Elijah the prophet came and appeared to them as the person crying out at the door. He said, "Give me some of your hay, for my wife is giving birth, and I have nothing for her to lie down on." Rabbi Akiba said to his wife, "You see, there is someone who doesn't even have hay." She said to him, "Go and sit in the house of study."
Very nice. Okay, Ruth, the last piece, and then we'll discuss all 3.
When he came back, he brought 24,000 students with him. His wife heard. She was going out to meet him. Neighbors said to her, "Borrow clothes, dress, and cover yourself." She said, "A righteous man knows the needs of his beast." When she drew near him, she fell on her face and kissed his feet. His attendants were pushing her aside. He said to them, "Leave her. Mine and yours are hers."
All right. So what are we learning from all this story about her? What kinds of things is the Talmud telling us about Akiba, about the wife of Akiba, about the father of the wife of Akiba? What things is it concerned about? What things do you have questions about?
She's independent. She's somewhat rebellious.
Yes, she has a voice. We hear from her. Great, that's important. What else?
She's very important to him.
And she's important to him, right? Okay. And Janet, do you have your hand up, or you're doing computer stuff? Oh, you can't unmute.
And she doesn't care about material things.
She's not worried about material things. They're saying, how can you go meet your husband wearing what you're wearing? What else is going on?
Am I unmuted?
I missed that.
Okay, I'm unmuted. Okay, so I've always loved this story so much because she sacrificed everything for his learning. I mean, it's, to me, such a beautiful story. And she was really, is there such a word? It's tzedekis. She was such a role model for
she's certainly
giving
given,
and
yeah.
learning. And it's just a beautiful story. And I've heard it many times, but it's still beautiful and always moves me.
And so she is giving everything, right? We have this image of this very poor woman who his attendants are wanting to sweep away from before the rabbi, you know, don't let this dirty woman near. And so he has to claim her again, or she's going to be removed. So she has nothing left. She's given everything. I saw a bumper sticker the other day that said, give 100% of everything you do except donating blood. Anyway, I thought about that. You know, there are limits to how far you should give everything. But anyway, she's pushing that limit just a little bit, but she's really given of herself. So we see someone giving of herself, right? And
can I ask
Dory,
something?
Yeah.
Yeah. Was she giving because was she not allowed to study and she really wanted to study? I mean, could that be?
We don't know. We're not told whether that's something that she wishes she was. We know she's bright because certainly she was responding to what he says and says, you know, you ought to be studying. So you know, we could certainly imagine a story where she would be the student, but this is not, for whatever it is. She's the supporter of Akiba, the student. Ruth, you have your hands up.
Yeah, she obviously sees something in him that perhaps others don't. And she is encouraging him because it says at the end, he came back with what, 24,000 followers. So he was an exceptional person. And somehow or other, she saw that in him and wanted to encourage it.
Right. So she saw what he was capable of. So tell me about the finances of these stories.
Susan, could I ask you one question?
Please. Questions are great.
Many years ago, there was a book used in Reform synagogues, I think it was called Leaders of Our People. And there's a story of Akiba. And the story begins, it ends with all what we've been talking, some of what we've been talking about here, but it begins with the idea that when she met him, he did not know how to read, and that she taught him how to read. Is there any truth to that story at all? Because it was a whole chapter in the book for about fourth graders.
Right. And so I'm sure that the author didn't make it up. And so it may be in a later source that, you know, because he is such an important person. So he gathers these stories. For whatever reason, I felt it wasn't going to fit in with the time frame I was looking at, but it doesn't mean that we don't have such stories. So any other questions? Brenner.
Maybe you're about to go here anyway, but I'm curious to sort of the extent of her financial autonomy, but not obviously independence. So she seemed to have a pocket of money that she could give to him, which was enough to get him, you know, to pay his bills so that he could study and not, you know, work a day job. But once she spent that, you know, her financial autonomy is taken away from her, you know, and so she doesn't really have financial independence as the daughter of this, you know, big time person. So I feel like it's sort of an in-between area of what a young unmarried woman has the ability to spend on. And I was also curious, is her betrothal, she clearly violates a taboo by arranging her own betrothal, but it seems to be binding. The dad doesn't undo it. So I was curious about that as well.
So I think that the rules about betrothal, and that's something I've written about elsewhere, the rules about betrothal are really de facto rather than de jure, you know, sort of evaluating whether somebody is betrothed for sake of legal purposes and whatnot. So again, it's a good question, but I don't know, you know, we don't see him able to withhold the challenge. So somehow or other, yes, you know, the very fact that the father's against it and has and it holds means it's valid. And again, I don't know the specifics of it, but what you're pointing out about her finances is really the big question. And it's why I'm so convinced about the ambivalence of the Talmud here, is that we've got what I'm saying is a mixed message. We have this woman who has, as Rabbi Glickman is saying, is we've got this wealth that she has grown up with, and that she has seemingly enough wealth to give to her husband to study. But on the other hand, she seems to run out, because the text is very clear that her father cuts her off. Her father cuts her off. So she's not wealthy. And that's where, well, that's where my antenna go up, and I get a little suspicious. And so let me share with you the last text here, which is the Palestinian Talmud text. And I could use one more reader, I think. Anybody want to read? We had all our readers. I can read it, so not a problem. So here we have, this is from the Palestinian Talmud instead of the Babylonian, and it's similar. Rabbi Akiba made a city of gold. Now remember, in the Babylonian Talmud, we had this imagination, if I could, I would give you a Jerusalem of gold. And so here you have a different rendition of the story. Rabbi Akiba made a city of gold for his wife. The wife of Rabbi Gamliel, the patriarch, saw her and became jealous. Rabbi Gamliel's wife came and reported Rabbi Akiba's gift. Excuse me, I'm gonna sneeze. Thank you. Rabbi Gamliel's wife came and reported Rabbi Akiba's gift to her husband. He said, "Have you done for me what she did for him?" Rabbi Akiba's wife sold the very braids on her head and gave the money to him so that he might be able to study. So this is kind of one text that has a lot of the same elements going on. And Rabbi Glickman's point about the finances is here too, because I haven't priced them, but how far are braids on your head going to get towards education, right? Not so far. So he comes back with what, 24,000 students, and according to that one telling, even if it's only 2,400, I mean, I suspect everybody on this call has paid for education at some point, whether your own or your children's or your grandchildren's, it costs. So that the kind of thinking that Rabbi Glickman was doing of how much money did she have is a much more fruitful way of thinking about it. Ruth.
I'm thinking that maybe the braids is a metaphor. They don't mean it literally. She didn't have braids on her head that she sold. But if she came from a wealthy family, I would assume she had jewelry and possessions like that she then could have sold to accumulate the money that she then gave Rabbi Akiba for his education. So perhaps that answers the question of where she got the money. Even though her father cut her off, she apparently had stuff of her own that she could dispose of.
Mm-hmm.
Excuse me, you don't have a raise hand icon on the screen, so I can't raise my hand because I'm an inanimate.
Oh, just speak. Yes, please.
I wanted to know, first of all, in those days, was it common to wear wigs? Because maybe she could sell it and get money, because it reminds me of the Louisa May Alcott story in Little Women, where one of the daughters sold her hair, and to pay for a member of their family. And that could be one answer, so that she actually did sell her braids. But this story, in fact, all of the stories that we saw today look so very human and so very modern to me today that I can't believe it. I mean, you know, between the neighbors having a dispute over a tree in someone else's yard, and the father saying, this guy isn't good enough for you, I'm disowning you if you're betrothed to him. And then maybe he he disowned her because she had the nerve to speak up. And then last but not least, the women giving everything to the men. And I remember when I was younger, I will tell you that, as I said, that picture was me in 2014, and actually it was cropped from a group photo because that's what I do. It's a hobby. I'm a retired software engineer. But it seems to me that when I was younger, I personally gave up portions of my education in favor of my husband. And at some point I realized that I wasn't doing myself any favor. And then I went ahead, and got my master's in computers. But the point is that women today are different than the women of my generation, where they give up everything for their husbands. At some point, women do need to look out for themselves. And so you've brought up some very good stories that show the transition of culture and thoughts and the progress of women. Forget the financial part, but the cultural progress of women in slowly reaching out for a better lifestyle for themselves as well. So these were some great stories. And again, I thank you for inviting me.
Good. I'm glad you like the story, and it is an important one, but let's not leave the financial part. I mean, I'm glad there's, good things that it's showing in both in comparison and in contrast, but let's not leave the financial just yet, because
But the point I'm making is that I didn't leave the financial out, because the woman sold her braids to help her husband.
Right.
But the point is, if the women did more to pursue their own interests and develop their own finances, they wouldn't have to sell their braids. Because
and I agree.
Personal thing.
Right. And I'm someone who has spent years and years in school. So I'm certainly not going to say that women shouldn't educate themselves. But for a moment, let's just look at her as the benefactor, right? She has supported her husband's career, whether it was just the braids. I'm inclined to think, he was in school for a little longer than that. He had students, how do you, what kinds of support go there? And so she is a benefactor, and she's not quite called that. That's the flag that I'm seeing, is that here is evidence of this great teacher in the Jewish tradition. And how does he get supported? He gets supported by his wife. And yet all of these stories are told in such a way that she's very devoted to him and very sweet. And so that's, I think, one of the things that's rubbing us a little bit, is how come she is giving everything to him and not getting anything? And if she sees her life as a benefactor, then in addition, maybe she wants to be educated, but maybe she wants to be a benefactor. And the question should come up, why is she not being recognized as one of the great benefactors of the rabbinic tradition, right? If she was the one who saw that he could be the teacher he was, yes, this, dirty woman gets picked up by her husband, who says, what's mine is hers is mine. It's all very beautiful and romantic. And yet she is not given the public recognition that somebody who's done what she has done should get. Or did she? So one of the things in that story that catches my attention is that crown, that Jerusalem of gold, that city of gold crown.
Morning.
So one of the things about that crown that went off, I first came across crowns because I was looking at weddings. And so I was interested in wedding crowns. And so there was a period in my studies where I was just looking at crowns anywhere I could get them. And the fact of the matter is that people don't wear crowns normally. The people who wear, especially city crowns, you know, so you wear a wedding crown for a wedding, the bride has a crown, but who wears a crown with cities on it? Goddesses wear a crown with the city. I'm muted too. Anyway, so this is a picture of Ceres, I think. Well, anyway, so you can see the ramparts there. So, and oh, I should have thought about it. You can look up if you're interested, Ephesus Aphasia. Ephesus, Artemis of Aphasia. In fact, let me just do that because we can, right? While I'm talking for a second, let me just look up Artemis of Ephesus. Okay, here, and then there's got to be some images. Oh yes, look at this. So here, I'm going to share my screen again and show you this wonderful Google image. Okay, where's my screen? All right, share. All right, so here she is, and she has a crown. Okay, images. Images for Artemis Aphasia. All right. So if you're ever in Ephesus in Asia Minor, if we can ever travel again, there's one of these that has this tremendous crown. Oh, that's probably the one which we don't. Hello. They're not giving me. Oh, here we are. Is that a crown? Isn't that a wonderful city crown? Anyway, so Artemis, Ceres. Also, we have inscriptions of someone who donates to the synagogue. It was a Christian woman, actually, who donated to the synagogue, and she gets a seat and she gets a gold crown. So that crown is telling me something. She's given a crown. It seems very unlikely that this is jewelry that her husband would give to her. It seems to me that that is the clue in this story, that this is what she was given because she was the benefactor of this Beit Midrash where Akiba studied, and that she made sure she was like the goddess. She was the patron of this institution, so that she's recognized. You know, nowadays we do gala dinners, but you do something for your major patron. So what was done was a crown. The goddess was the patron of the city. She was the patron of this Beit Midrash. And so what I find so fascinating about this story is all the push and pull, that on one hand, she comes from a very wealthy family. Oh, but she was disowned, so she really doesn't have so much money. So she gave the braids of her head. It's much more romantic anyway. But what if she wasn't really, you know, disowned? What if she had a lot of money? What if she really was a patron? What if that crown is a testimony to that? And so that would be in keeping with other women benefactors we know of that era. It would make sense that the rabbinic community would want to have money supporting their institutions. And yet there's this great ambivalence about acknowledging it. So as opposed to acknowledging that she was this benefactor, unlike Rufina, who could build her own tomb, right? This is not that world. So, and you know, we don't have Akiba's wife writing these texts. We have somebody else who's curating this material. And so by the time it gets in the Talmud, the crown is jewelry, and that she was certainly the support of her husband. She gave lots, but it's not that we have the Mrs. Rabbi Akiba synagogue or the Miss Rabbi Akiba Beit Midrash. We just have her in these romantic tales. So what I'm seeing is this great ambivalence in these stories to both talk about benefaction, but to not go too far. Janet. Oh, you need a mute again. Unmute. Mimi, while we're waiting for Janet.
Okay, I'm here. All right, I just wanted to say that it was a long-standing tradition in Europe that the husband would study. It was my father too, and he was, before the war, he was studying in the Masifta. He was a Talmudic scholar, and they found a family, a very wealthy family, and the wife was going to be this daughter of the very wealthy family, and he was supposed to marry her, and that was the deal. The women weren't supposed to study. They were supposed to support the family. He was going to be with that family and support it. And that was the tradition in Europe. So this is a long tradition. And we're talking about, you know, the 1940s. So that women were not recognized as benefactors, just the family was giving the money to support a scholar for the rest of his life.
So, but you're talking hundreds of years.
That's been the story for a long time.
But you're talking hundreds of years after this text. And so it may well be
So I'm
something
saying
like
it's
this.
continued.
Right.
Yeah.
But why is that the tradition as opposed to the crowns that were given in this era for people who did those things? Mimi.
I don't know.
Thinking about the possibility that her father did cut her off, but then as Akiva became more and more prominent and more successful, that her father said, whoa, maybe I made a mistake, because he is this teacher and scholar, and maybe he brought her back, funded her. Is there any possibility of that, or any indication?
You know, you see what we have. So, you know, I think it's certainly a possibility. We know of lots of people, you know, there are legions of stories of people who cut someone out of their will and then uncut them. You know, I mean, we don't know that he had 10 other kids if he only had. Now, Kalba Sabua, the father, you know, ends up playing this role in Talmud of being the sort of not very respected, you know, sort of, you know, so his role is to not be smart enough to recognize a good thing, but we really don't know. But yes, somehow she had money. And, you know, as Rabbi Glickman was saying, you know, this costs money. You can't go study if you don't have, I mean, there are scholarships, but they have to come from somewhere. So you need your benefactors. That, you know, it would be nice if you could just have everybody study, but the reality is that you still need to pay a lot of people to keep an institution going. And how does that work? And the idea that he couldn't afford to go but went is nice, but if you look at education, for the most part, it's people who can afford to go. So that you read those and you want to know then about the benefactors all the more than you would otherwise. Adrian.
Thank you.
Oh, you're muted.
Adrian, I'd like to go back to the first paragraph.
Great.
When, so I have to think that there's some kind of backstory, that this was a very liberal, wealthy family. You know, in that she had, in the attitude towards women and women's access to money and feeling her own sense of autonomy and power. So
you cut off there, but yeah.
Feeling her own sense of autonomy and power, that was encouraged in this family. I'm assuming, because we read so often how women were overlooked and the daughters were overlooked, and they had to petition the courts for access for the land, and so she had this access, and although Dad got angry at her because maybe he wasn't his choice, as someone else had said, she still had the access, and I would imagine, or maybe not, that was unusual in a family of means for the daughter to have that kind of access.
Yeah, I think those are great points. I mean, that was one of the very first things we said about her was she has her own voice. She knows what she wants. She's able to, say, this is what I want, you should go study. She's able to speak for herself. So where did she learn that? If it wasn't from her family, then where? And that somehow or other, she has learned her own power and learned the power of the money she has access to and knows what she wants to do with it. And, that certainly seems consistent. Ruth. Oh, we're not hearing you.
Can you go back to the second paragraph where they're lying in the hay and the straw?
Sure.
Somebody comes and they give this person straw for his wife who is having a baby.
Right.
What is that all about?
It certainly seems like a teaching, doesn't it? Here, we can look at it. And it's also, this is the Babylonian Talmud's mention of this crown. So the daughter of Kalbat Sabua became engaged to Rabbi Akiva. We don't know how, but anyway, Kalbat Sabua heard and cut her off from any of his property. She went and married him in the winter. They used to lie in the hay barn and he would take hay out of her hair. He said to her, were I only able, I would give you a Jerusalem of gold. Elijah the prophet came and appeared to them as a person crying out at the door. He said, give me some of your hay, for my wife is giving birth and I have nothing for her to lie upon. Rabbi Akiva said to his wife, you see, there is someone who doesn't even have hay. She said, go and sit in the house of study. So I think this fits in with what we've just been saying, Ruth, about her voice. She says to him, go sit in the house of study. Right. So it's his recognition of, the mitzvah of giving hay, even if that's all you have. So, and I would think that the best way to study this text would be to put together a lot of the Elijah the prophet stories, because those, of course, are glimpses, the Elijah the prophet who is preceding the Messiah. And so, he's marked out, Akiba is marked out as a star figure by this association with Elijah. Right. But this mention where he is saying, I would give you the Jerusalem of gold, it's fascinating to me as the historian, because there is this thread of talking about this Jerusalem of gold as a piece of jewelry, as if he could be the one giving, just as we have in the other. And again, whether that happened or whether it was a communal gift, but I'm pushing for the other, having seen my share of pictures of crowns of that period, that to have it as jewelry just seems a little dubious to me in that particular world where crowns were a language. So. Any other questions? Thank you all for all your comments and questions. This has just been a treat for me to have all of your thinking about this text story.
So was that common then for people to give crowns to benefactors?
Yes. Yes.
Okay.
So there, I mentioned there's a mention of gold crowns that are given to people who have donated to the synagogue, along with a special seat, so that is, their crowns are given. And, you have the laurel crown that was given as for athletic achievements. Pliny writes about crowns and which ones mean what, rose crowns, especially rose petals that have come from India. And, so you have a world where, you've got lots of different materials that are more exotic or more local, and which ones do you use for what. So anyway, it's the city walls that says patron, patron, patron to me. So
but that was like a common thing.
It's hard to know common. I mean, when you get one of my friends who's also a historian of the 3rd, 4th century says, modern historians, they can say it happened on June 5th at 10 o'clock. When you look at our period, you say, well, it was somewhere between the 2nd and the 5th century, right? So because you have like one little piece of data here and one little piece of data there. But yes, there is evidence of crowns. You have Pliny, who's written this whole thing about crowns. And so the idea of having a crown that, you know, didn't fit in at all seems a little surprising, but you know, you don't know what's going to get found in the future. So
Thank you.
all right, any other questions, or should we say goodbye to each other and
Susan,
or formally goodbye and then just schmooze a little bit? But anyway, I thank you all for all the good thinking you did. And anyway, so
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you.
wait, excuse me, Susan, first of all, there was a question in the chat room that I thought perhaps you might address. Somebody asked, isn't it possible that each of Akiba's students paid him something, a little bit, and that he was then coming back with so many students, perhaps that's how he had money to continue rather than.
Yeah, once he is the head teacher, then, and again, you know, one of the things is that the Beit Midrash is different in Palestine than in Babylonia. In Babylonia, well, see, now you're asking me a question that has lots of stuff. So the Geonim, the 9th century academies, were these big deals. Okay, so when you think of the Academy of Sora or Pompadita, you know, and these big yeshivas that later become the model of yeshivas, the 9th century Geonim write about the Beit Midrash as starting in the 3rd century as we know it. But, you know, we know about how you can give your institution a legacy that goes back further than, right? So as a historian, I'm sort of skeptical how organized the yeshiva was that early. And so the scholar, that's David Goodblatt, by the way, who's written about that, you know, so we know of very organized yeshivas later on, but the Palestinian were less so. So one of the things is that, and I've just written a paper about Palestinian Beit Midrashim, and they get supported. There's a teeny weeny bit about the community supporting them. There's individual gifts occasionally, right? We've been reading about. Yes, people were expected to pay. And this seems very in keeping with the elite Roman education where people from wealthy families. So yes, tuitions would have gone for most of it. And you could also have barter. So you might have paid with your apples or, you know, your olives, probably not apples, but olives. You might have, you know, a bushel of olives might have gone towards your tuition or whatever. So yes, there are different ways of paying, but again, supporting an institution is, it costs a lot of money to support a school. Sisterhood supports the religious school because you know perfectly well that the families paying towards religious school is not enough to support religious school, so that you have monies going to religious school. So even if each of the students paid, you still need to have support for an institution. So I think, you know, yes, as the head teacher, he would have been paid, but I don't think that you can imagine the kind of robust institution with that many students if it doesn't have other sources of support.
Thank you. Also, on behalf of the Adult Ed, I want to thank you to the moon and the stars. It was an absolutely wonderful presentation. Gave us all things to think about and showed us that we as women were important back then too, no matter what was written or not written. It was fun to be able to see it. And I loved the opening. You need to ask a question to be able to get an answer about anything. It was just wonderful. Thank you so much. Well worth waiting a year to hear you. We hope it will be less before the next one. Thank you.
That's right.
Yeah, thank you very much for inviting me. And also, Chag Purim Sameach.
V'gam lachen.
Okay. Yasha talk. Thank you very much, Rabbi Marks.
Bye-bye.
Bye. Bye-bye, everybody.
Bye.
Stay
Thank
safe.
you.
Take care.
Thank you all.
Thank
for-
Stay safe. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Rabbi Marks.
Thank you, Dana.
Thank you.
Thank you. And Jesse, thank you for all your help.
You're welcome.
Absolutely.